want some advice, you gotta listen to me. Get a hold of your life, and you can have a new dream. Forget the ups and the downs, but there's a new game in town. For every turn in the road, and there's a new way to go.
I don't care what you say, gonna find my own way. You just try to persuade everyone around you.
We'll make it easy for you. Plan everything that you do. Won't have to work very hard. You'll make it big from the start. Don't have to take it from me. Here's a list you can see. Where every one of those names I found their fortune and fame.
Well, it all sounds so sweet, so simple and so neat. But can I believe anything you tell me.
I know your life's a big mistake. Let's go. This music you must face. Listen to me, please. I'm down upon my knees. They'll never treat you like they did before. I'll make your dreams come true. Now all I need is you. Please believe me, and all this will be yours. You'll have a penthouse in town. Live in a penthouse in town. You'll be the king with the crown. Live on a country estate. Live on a country estate. You'll have a 20-foot gate. You'll have a 20-foot gate. And getting tan to the pool. You're getting tan by the pool. You'll be making them drool. And you'll be making them drool. Taking trips overseas. And taking trips overseas. Anything that you please. Do anything that you please.
I feel so alone. Where did I go so wrong? Do you know? Can you tell? Maybe you can help me.
I know it's hard for you to take. Let's go. This move you have to make. Hey, listen to me, please. I'm down upon my knees. They'll never treat you like they did before. I'll make your dreams come true. Now all I need is you. Please believe.
Okay, 1 second. Okay. Left channel.
Hi, my name is Kaylin Nelson, and I am one of the winners of the First in the Family Humanist Scholarship. Firstly, I'd like to thank Black Skeptics for awarding me this scholarship. In the next few weeks, I will be attending the University of Central Florida, where I will be majoring in social work. Although I'm not completely sure where this path will take me, my dream career is that of a counselor or a therapist.
Hi. Hi, Carrie. Sikivu. Oh, okay. That's good. Yeah, that is important.
Hello and good morning. I just spoke to Sikivu, and she would like to start immediately and go directly into the question and answer. So if you want coffee or a snicky snack or anything like that, go ahead and grab it now, because she's had some computer issues that she's been up a long time. So we're very glad she's here to share with us. And so thank you. Let's give you a hand for being here. So I always like to start with a little thing that people are more important than beliefs, and we really believe that, and human hands solve human problems. I'd like to thank you guys for all being here today. It's cold and it's nice, and if anybody wants to move kind of toward the center front, she said, because there's so few people here right now. I know it'll fill in a little bit, but anyway, without any further ado, Sikivu Hutchinson is an educator, author, playwright, and guitarist. Her books include Humanists in the Hood, Unapologetically Black, Feminist, and Heretical. So join me in welcoming her to our talk today, and thank you so much for being here.
Okay, good morning. Thank you. Yeah, either. And happy Women's History Month. I'm going to start with a reading. And I have some slides and some videos. And basically, I'm going to do an overview of why I wrote Humanists in the Hood, what the impetus was, and my background, and then really looking at what is culturally responsive humanist practice from a Black womanist, feminist perspective. There's a lot of talk about secular humanist ideology, but I wanted to frame this vis-a-vis my context as an educator, as an organizer, as a resource provider, and a writer, and an artist. And so I have a quote from Audre Lorde, who's one of our visionary Black womanist, humanist, activist, lesbian, all-around badasses, and we utilize her work a lot in my African American humanism class, as well as in my work with high school students in South L.A., African American, female identified, and Latinx. So the first page of my book talks about these intersections of multicultural identity. And I say, I came to feminism as a baby atheist growing up in South LA. My first pangs of unapologetic godlessness were in Catholic school. Sitting in dreary religion classes run by sanctimonious white male teachers made me despise the Bible, its moral hypocrisies, and its violent, woman-hating language. It was inane to me that a centuries-old good book could dictate that I remain silent, bow down to patriarchs, step back as chattel, and view my body as an impure vessel of original sin, redeemable only through self-sacrifice and submission to a male deity. It was madness that these atrocities could be justified by the unquestioned moral righteousness of a Christian tradition that condoned slavery, rape, and homophobia. The so-called beauty and majesty of the good book and the omnipotent God at the cosmic switch of the universe were a patent lie in the face of all the suffering and inequality I saw right in front of me. So while some were able to compartmentalize these fascistic tenets, cherry-pick the good stuff ad nauseum, and divorce the bad stuff from God, I decided that it didn't make sense to give the Bible nor any so-called holy book that gave supernatural beings dominion over mere earthlings a pass. Why not cut out the theological claptrap and chuck gods altogether? Why not concede that the crazy quilt of theistic belief systems, creeds, and dogmas that sprawl across cultures and nations was a far greater testament to human artfulness than godly omniscience? As a 12-year-old accustomed to hearing about how that conniving temptress Eve screwed up folks' residence in the Garden of Eden, it was clear to me that much of the policing of femininity that I and other girls encountered had a strong basis in Christian religious dogma. From the moment we're assigned the female gender at birth, girl sexuality is a commodity, an object, an asset, and a, quote, liability to be marketed, bought, sold, and controlled in a birth-to-death cycle in which girls and women are straitjacketed by a litany of do's and mostly don'ts. Don't sit this way, don't walk this way, talk this way, dress this way, don't go there, don't hang out with them, don't drink, smoke, act like a bitch, act like a hoe, act like a dude, get yourself raped or knocked up. And when you get older, supposedly beyond the regime of the sexualizing male gaze, don't ever think that you will be relevant, whether you have kids or not. At every stage, organized religion, through the language of a grindingly policing theism, is there to impose boundaries and limits. The Catholic school that I went to for 1 year was a perfect training ground for this dance of invisibility. In the Reagan years, it was widely viewed by some middle-class Black and Latinx parents as an antidote to the so-called bad schools in South L.A. and neighboring Inglewood, which was then a predominantly Black community that had been largely white up until the late 60s. On the surface, the school's virtually all-white faculty and ethnically diverse student body were poster children for multicultural integration. Beneath that shiny facade, the school had the usual cauldron of hierarchies: bullying cliques, authoritarian religious bureaucrats, predatory jocks, and favorites playing teachers. Then as now, private religious schools were microcosms of a segregated two-tier educational system. Middle-class and working-class parents of color, desperate to give their children a leg up, bust them to elite schools hoping against hope that the racial tensions that fueled post-Brown v. Board of Education desegregation battles wouldn't affect their babies. These tensions were crystal clear at my high school, where upper middle class to affluent white students lived in Tony single-family homes and condos that dominated the multi-million-dollar beachside community where the school was based, and Black and Latinx students crammed into public buses, traveling from the demonized inner city to the mostly white West Side. The implications of this dichotomy would shape my budding consciousness about public education, public space, race and gender, institutional racism, sexism, and heterosexism, which were critical to the disciplinary regime of the white savior patriarchs and matriarchs who adopted a missionary mentality about youth of color while policing girls' bodies and conduct. So I wanted to, again, try and trouble these boundaries, to disrupt these stereotypes about who a feminist is, who an atheist is, who a humanist is, within a very specific urban context of South L.A. Some of you may be familiar with South L.A. or South Central because it's been demonized within mainstream media as this shithole of gangs and drugs and ghettoization and broken families and broken lives and dysfunctionality and pathology. Supposedly the antithesis to the Hollywoodized fantasy of Southern California of endless beaches and endless sunshine and endless opportunity as this font of the American dream for white folks. And so the hood part of the book comes from my lived experiences, again, growing up in South LA, writing in South LA, parenting in South LA, being an educator, organizing in South LA, and being steeped in these very resilient, very nuanced, very diverse communities of color that are often erased from mainstream representations of LA County. I wanted to foreground our communities in humanist discourse because so often the local political and material conditions of Black lives, again, are invisibilized, to use a millennial/Gen Z term. And so I was born at the end of the turbulent 60s. This was a period where Black folks were under siege. We were under siege by terrorist state violence, under siege by redlining, under siege by COINTELPRO that systematically devastated and destroyed Black radical movements and Black radical activists and organizers. We were under siege by what I alluded to earlier, the aftermath of the 1965 Watts Rebellion that precipitated the mass exodus of white folks from the scary inner city into suburban enclaves, the West Side, the Valley, where they were able to systematically and ritualistically create generational wealth for their kids, their grandkids, and great-grandkids. And this was something that was largely denied African Americans, as we're seeing, that the home owning rates among African Americans are worse now than they were pre-Brown v. Board, and that Gen Z and millennial African American youth cannot afford market rate apartments, much less single family homes. So during this period, we were also under siege by what has been characterized as this global pandemic within a pandemic, that is sexual violence, abuse, and femicide, that happens in our homes, that happens in our churches, happens in our school communities, is under the radar to so many African American femmes, girls, and queer youth and gender expansive folks, and is propped up by religious misogynoir, which is anti-Black misogyny, religious homophobia, religious heterosexism, and religious transphobia. And when I was growing up, there was really no language, there was no advocacy, there was no platform, there was certainly no #MeToo movement to amplify and to lift up the lived experiences of survivors like myself. There's a really devastating stat that came out from the Black Women's Blueprint a few years ago that indicated that when they turn 18, approximately 60% of African American girls will have experienced sexual abuse and sexual violence. And this goes across sexuality as well. So I think it's important for this discourse of intersectionality, and that's a reference to Audre Lorde's quote, "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives," to talk about what are the nuances, what are the actual delineations of African American humanism versus European American humanism. So as I mentioned, I teach an African American humanism class. It's actually the first of its kind to be taught by a Black woman in US colleges and universities. And some of the principles of African American humanism are based upon a critique of white supremacy, of colonialism, and imperialist origins of US state power, authority, and control. African American humanism challenges the rise of the European Enlightenment. It unpacks the degree to which the European Enlightenment, of course, occurred within the context of slavery, racial capitalism, settler colonialism, sexual violence, the appropriation and theft of the reproductive labor of Black women as quote-unquote hypersexual, unrapeable Jezebels, as well as the theft and the dispossession of indigenous land, labor, and capital. And it connects these trajectories with the contemporary system of segregation and spatial apartheid that ensures the economic dominance of private faith-based social welfare structures, which ultimately disenfranchise poor and working class Black folks and people of color in hyper-segregated urban and rural communities with high unemployment, homelessness, domestic violence, policing, and mass incarceration. And certainly, as I alluded to before, Black Gen Z and Black millennial youth and young adults are living this nightmare of structural racism and white supremacy, settler colonialism, and new Jim Crow apartheid, to utilize the book that was written about a decade ago, talking about the institutionalization of the school-to-prison pipeline. African American progressive secular humanism acknowledges and challenges the impact that legacies of domestic violence, sexual violence, and terrorism, be they faith-based, be they familial, and are state-sanctioned, have had on Black communities, bodies, and genders by putting violence prevention, education, and alternative systems of care in place. It seeks to amplify the importance of everyday lived experience and cultural knowledge among African descent peoples, valuing intersectionality, interdependence, and queerness within Black communities. It strives to be more than just reactive to how white Christian nationalist fascist regimes are demonizing Black and BIPOC youth in K-12 schools, and espouses teaching curricula and youth-driven outreach that can provide liberatory models for leadership, critical consciousness, and empowerment. It espouses the development of Black-affirming secular humanist community spaces as an alternative to hierarchical religious, faith-based spaces which have traditionally been oppressive and disenfranchising for Black women and queer folks. So a decade ago, Black Skeptics Los Angeles, which is an organization that I founded back in 2010, 2011, to provide alternatives to organized religion for African American folks in South L.A. We spearheaded the First in the Family Humanist Scholarship. And this is a scholarship fund that is oriented towards helping and assisting for the long term BIPOC secular youth, again, first generation college youth, undocumented youth, youth who are in foster care or formerly from foster care, system-involved youth and LGBTQI plus and gender-expansive youth. And so young people can receive up to $5,000 in scholarship support. It's really important that we offer multi-year support because of all of the challenges and disparities that confront first-generation African-American, Latinx, Indigenous, and AAPI youth navigating higher education. And so these are some of the faces of the youth that we have provided scholarships to over the past decade, coming from all over the nation. We also had a companion scholarship program that provided scholarship assistance to local South L.A., LAUSD youth, Los Angeles Unified School District youth, from some of the same vulnerable communities. So I'm going to play a video from one of our recipients. She received a scholarship in 2021, goes to the University of Central Florida, talked about the need for humanist mental health care, because oftentimes what we find as African American secular folks, that if we're trying to seek mental health care in the dominant system, that it's very difficult to find practitioners coming from a humanist, and particularly a culturally competent humanist standpoint.
My name is Kaylin Nelson, and I am one of the winners of the First in the Family Humanist Scholarship. Firstly, I'd like to thank Black Skeptics for awarding me this scholarship. In the next few weeks, I will be attending the University of Central Florida, where I will be majoring in social work. Although I'm not completely sure where this path will take me, my dream career is that of a counselor or a therapist. As someone who is raised in a religious family but does not necessarily subscribe to the same beliefs as my family, making me a secular youth, I understand how important mental health services can be for people like me. Often, our families do not understand this divergence in thoughts or beliefs. We are seen as rebels or deviants simply for not believing. From my personal experience, I know that this can be extremely alienating. Personally, when I have struggled with mental health issues in the past or been caught in difficult situations, the only answer that I've ever been given was prayer. Now, I respect all religions, of course, but prayer sometimes felt impossible or useless when I was in those situations. At times like those, I would have benefited greatly from having someone who was unbiased or non-religious to listen to me and to provide me with guidance. I believe that religion can be an objectively good thing. It is the embodiment of the human desire to believe that there is a reason for everything. I think that that is a beautiful characteristic of mankind. However, I also think that religion has been perverted and used as a weapon rather than as the healing tool it was intended to be. My goal in life is to do that healing, using methods other than religion and fear. There is a quote that I absolutely love that says, "When you grow up, be the person you needed when you were younger." That is exactly what I plan to do. With the help of this scholarship, I will be able to pursue my dreams of becoming a counselor and opening my own practice in a low-income area, where I can provide mental health services to underprivileged people who might not have had access to these mental health services otherwise. I will use my degree to create a safe space for people like me, who might be the deviants or black sheep of their family. As someone of intersecting marginalized identities, I acknowledge that it is significantly harder to get ahead in today's society, whether that be academically, career-wise, or economically. I heavily appreciate any help or opportunities that I am given, and anything that puts me one step closer to receiving my degree. I understand that higher education is a privilege that not everyone is afforded, and I am deeply grateful to have made it this far. Once again, I would like to thank Black Skeptics Los Angeles for this opportunity. I can't wait to take the support that I have been provided during this period in my life and pay it forward in the future. Thank you. Hi.
Looks like I don't have Belin's video, but Belin Padilla is also one of the recipients, and she's a multi-year recipient from Scripps College. She identifies as queer, and in her presentation, she talked about coming from a high school where there were not college readiness and college prep programs for the predominantly Black and Latinx student body at that high school. And that, of course, disadvantaged young people when they were trying to apply to four-year colleges and universities. In the state of California, we have something that is called the A through G categories, and that's a whole complement of classes that are college prep classes that one needs in order to apply to UCs and Cal States in California. So if you do not have that complement of classes, and have passed them with a C or better, then you're basically dead in the water if you're trying to apply to CSUs and UCs. And we know increasingly that UCs are requiring elite AP classes and elite honors classes for folks to get into those campuses. So her video, I think, was very effective in foregrounding how the school-to-prison pipeline really undermines and devastates the prospects of African American and Latinx working-class first-generation college students. The other thing that is important to foreground if we're thinking about all of these intersectional issues within K-12 education is obviously the right-wing, draconian, and fascistic backlash against critical race theory, against anti-racist and multicultural education, how that also informs the backlash against LGBTQ affirming curricula, as well as gender affirming care. I mean, we see this happening here in Texas, which has been an epicenter. We see it happening in Florida, of course, with the extremely terroristic Don't Say Gay bill. And these insidious examples of white Christian nationalist supremacy effectively undermine this age-old claim that the U.S. is somehow exceptionalist, that it's more advanced and enlightened on human rights, and certainly on secularism. It's also important for me, coming from a California and LA County context, to underscore that while there are these fascistic movements and regimes happening in the South and in the Midwest that absolutely require frontal activism and frontal mobilizing, that so-called progressive states like California are not out of the woods when it comes to structural and institutional homophobia and transphobia that deeply imperil queer youth on a day-to-day basis. In 2011, California passed the Fair Education Act, which mandates that LGBT affirming curricula be taught in the state's middle and high schools. Despite the passage of that act, fewer than 30% of high school and middle school campuses actually implement LGBT affirming curricula in their schools. So what I've experienced as a resource provider, an educator, and a mentor on the high school level is that normalized homophobia, normalized transphobia, normalized microaggressions and bullying and harassment against queer youth, particularly Black and Latinx queer youth, has a domino effect in terms of their experiences of anti-Blackness and white supremacy and misogyny or anti-Black misogyny. And that the trend has been that you see higher rates of push out among those youth, which means that they are being pushed out systematically of their school campuses, being over-disciplined, being shunted into juvenile facilities and adult facilities, being incarcerated at higher rates. So that's also a dynamic that is part and parcel of the school-to-prison pipeline. This over-incarceration of Black and Latinx queer youth that dovetails with the transphobic and homophobic harassment and bullying and violence that they're experiencing on a regular basis. One of the initiatives that we do annually with the Women's Leadership Project program that I founded, which is Black Feminist, Womanist Civic Engagement, Mentoring, and Advocacy program based in South L.A. schools in collaboration with Black Skeptics, is we do LGBTQ Youth of Color Institutes, we do Black queer youth retreats, trying to provide safe spaces for our youth that are not necessarily provided by gender and sexuality alliances or GSAs. GSAs are outstanding, they're wonderful, they're revolutionary within the context that we're in of heightened Christian fascism across ethnicity, not just white Christian fascism, but also the Black and Latinx version of Christian fascism and respectability politics. But it's unfortunate that GSAs are not more mainstreamed, that these safe spaces often are devalued, that there are turbulent fights that happen on school campuses in terms of allowing queer identified instructors and administrators to actually be visible, to actually provide mentoring, to provide engagement and prevention education for our youth. So these are some of the battles that we're actually fighting at the high schools that we partner with in concert with our youth activists and organizers who are 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, vulnerable, but still on the front lines of speaking truth to power. So again, many of the queer youth I work with, they emphasize this trauma of dealing with faith-based homophobia, anti-blackness, and sexism. Comes up time and time again, that they are not only being pushed out of their school communities, they're being pushed out of their homes, they are often becoming unhoused, they're couch surfing, they're becoming victims of sex trafficking. We know that trans and gender expansive queer youth of color have some of the highest rates of domestic sex trafficking and prostitution. And there's a really devastating CDC report that came out recently that talked about the high rates of hopelessness, of despair, of sadness that queer youth across ethnicity and girls across ethnicity are experiencing. So I want folks to just look at these stats because it's important if we're talking about, again, this nexus of sexism, misogyny, patriarchy, respectability politics, transphobia and homophobia, how it impacts the everyday lived experiences of our youth versus, female identified youth and queer youth versus cis male identified youth, that we see this big disparity. According to this new CDC report, 1 in 3 girls have had suicidal ideation, while 1 in 5 queer youth have actually attempted suicide. So I was up last night, in addition to trying to confront the nightmare of most of my files, most of my work from a decade ago being accidentally deleted, just marinating in anger about these stats. This should absolutely be a call to action, that we have queer youth that are ritualistically feeling these persistent feelings of suicide, sadness, are feeling that they need to leave school because of the unrelenting harassment and bullying that they're experiencing, have made a suicide plan, and experienced poor mental health during the past 30 days. So during a recent discussion that I had with some members of the Black Secular Collective at Pitzer College at my African American humanism class, and queer identified Black members, we were talking about the difficulty of community building among Black humanists, the difficulty of actually identifying physical safe spaces in the community, renting physical safe spaces, scheduling safe space events and activities for youth across religious identification who are queer. And this is especially true, again, as we consider the skyrocketing price of rent in LA, the fact that we have off-the-chart levels of gentrification in historically Black neighborhoods where folks are being dispossessed left and right, where the white folks that I talked about earlier who left the so-called savage inner city, for the Tony protected enclaves of the suburbs of the Valley and the West Side, have now descended back onto enclaves like Inglewood, enclaves like South L.A., enclaves like Compton. And Black and Latinx folks cannot afford rents, and they can't afford single-family homes in these communities as a result. So this is the perfect storm that our youth exist in. This nexus of gentrification, of eviction, of displacement and dispossession, and of course, criminalization anchoring everything. One of the reasons I founded the Women's Leadership Project over 20 years ago as a survivor was to counter the absence of Black feminist womanist programming in South LA schools. The absence of Black feminist womanist anti-racist programming that lifted up and amplified the lived experiences, the cultural knowledge, and the social capital of Black femme survivors and Black queer survivors. Didn't exist. So our primary focus in WLP is prevention education. That's the bedrock. Prevention education, activism, organizing, coalition building, and providing our youth with critical care, mentoring, listening, peacemaking. These are some of our youth from Gardena High School, Dorsey High School. They're South LA based. As you can see, it's Black, Latinx, predominantly African American. But my pride and joy are, there are two young women here. There's one, there she is, third from the left, that's Imani right there with the white shirt. She is still with WLP. Started with WLP as a 15-year-old. She's now 29. And so she actually works with WLP as a mentor and an advisor. And then another young woman who is sort of in the back there smiling next to Imani, who is Clay Wesley, and she's former foster, first in her family to go to college, graduated from Mount St. Mary's College with a degree in social work a few years ago. After an immense struggle, I might add, thinking about how few foster care youth actually make it through community college, much less four-year colleges and universities. And so she's here, right here, with Gardena next to Imani, and then she's on the far right there in the Dorsey picture. 8 years later, 9 years later. And so she's also in her early 30s, and she works for WLP. That through grant funding and through support from the community that we're able to provide internships and jobs for our alum, and they come back and mentor our current high school students. Another area that was really important for us to address was, again, this deficit in mental health care. And we certainly saw how this deficit was extremely impactful and extremely insidious during the COVID pandemic. I mean, we're still in the pandemic in certain degrees. But at the height of the pandemic, what our youth identified in a survey that they initiated, and this was all virtual because we were doing virtual education then on Zoom, they did a survey with about 150 youth in South LA who were survivors, and asked the survivors whether or not they had had any form of mental health care, any kind of counseling, any kind of therapy or intervention to help them cope with the trauma and potentially heal from the trauma. And about 60% of the African American girls and female identified youth who responded said that they had no intervention whatsoever. No therapy, no counseling, much less therapy or counseling provided to them by a Black, culturally competent practitioner. And so as a result of that survey, we initiated the Standing for Black Girls Wellness Initiative to connect our youth, Black femmes and queer youth, with Black, culturally competent, ideally womanist, feminist-aligned therapists and practitioners in the community, virtual, hybrid, or real-time, to provide that therapy, to provide that care to our youth who are trauma and violence survivors. And so that program, that initiative, it started out as a pilot in 2021, is now a permanent program. We've gotten permanent funding through LA County, in addition to a new grant stream that we've gotten from the Ujima community, which is the National Center on Domestic Violence Against Black Women. I've partnered with them on this initiative. But again, this is coming from youth data, from youth organizing, and from youth visioning, which is really critical to our programming. So if we look at the devaluation of social welfare and prevention education, it's effectively a not-so-subtle form of state violence. It goes hand in hand with carceral state divestment in communities of color, one in which Black women essential workers remain on the absolute bottom of the wage scale next to Latinx women. Due to the pandemic, women of color have disproportionately left the workforce. Left the workforce because there is no universal child care. Left the workforce because they are taking care of elderly family members, being those caregivers and those caretakers that are not provided by state-sanctioned health care. They are largely without the benefit of unionized jobs and job protections. Some of you all may be aware that the Los Angeles Unified School District is now embroiled in an incredibly turbulent fight with SEIU 99. I'm SEIU 721 shop steward within the LA County regime. And SEIU 99 is comprised of teachers' assistants, of janitors, of campus aides, bus drivers, all the support workers that are the foundation of the second largest school district in the nation. And so they're on the brink of a 3-day strike going down on Tuesday because the district refuses to get up off of its ass and provide them with the 30% that they deserve, the 30% increase, raise that they deserve. And so the United Teachers of LA are also joining the 3-day strike in solidarity. That is part and parcel of this issue of dispossession and structural racism and all of the legacies of redlining, of the Federal Housing Administration allowing white folks to escape to suburbs and to forge their version of the American dream and generational wealth for their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. That we have service workers who the district depends upon to move education, and they're not being provided with protections. They're not being provided with the basis for living in Southern California. That Southern California has become so egregiously and fascistically unaffordable that service workers that are the core of the district are not able to live in the very communities that they work in. And we see this time and time again across the nation with vulnerable workers of color, essential workers of color. And just to amplify this point, if we're talking about this, the nexus of low-wage work, work that is nominally unionized, in terms of folks not having defined benefit plans or having defined benefit plans that are shaky. African American and Latinx women under the pandemic who were domestic violence survivors experiencing these high rates of financial distress, fewer financial resources during COVID, many of them reporting that they had to return to their harm doer compared to survivors with more financial resources. Black and brown women survivors were more than 2 times as likely as white women survivors to be unable to pay multiple bills during COVID-19. And there have been many municipalities that had imposed moratoriums on eviction to help low-income renters, and those moratoriums have been sunsetted, have been phased out. And so you have thousands of folks that have become unhoused as a result. 2 times as many survivors of color who are essential workers reported experiencing high economic insecurity compared to white survivors who are essential workers. So these high rates of sexual and domestic violence and socioeconomic depression and dispossession are rightly characterized as a pandemic within a pandemic. It's important to note that domestic violence among Black and Latinx women, particularly elderly Black women and very young Black women, very young femmes, and trans youth, are leading drivers of homelessness. And nonetheless, the hashtag #MeToo movement, despite the efforts of founding feminist and womanist Tarana Burke, has really had minimal impact on the everyday experiences of Black women and girls dealing with sexual violence in this so-called Christian nation, where they are adultified, which means that they are branded as being older than their literal years. And what goes along with that is high rates of policing, high rates of push out from school, high rates of being sex trafficked and being victimized by sexual abuse on the home front. So perceived as both criminal and unrapeable, flouting respectability politics that privilege the humanity and innocence of white women and girls, it is for this reason that African American women and girls in particular do not publicly identify as atheists or necessarily connect with humanism. This is the challenge, that when you have atheism being associated with immorality, when atheism is associated with cultural pathology, with otherness, and Black women and girls are associated with otherness, cultural pathology, hypersexuality, and criminality, that this is a major disincentive for folks to identify as atheists publicly. And so that's really beside the point. The main point is providing humanist, culturally responsive care, providing systems, putting systems in place to redress the impact of all of these structural disparities. I had one of my youth, when I did a podcast called The Black Girl's Guide to Humanism, who she identifies as an atheist. And she's a 10th grader. She expressed anxiety about being repeatedly told she was going to hell by a male student at her high school. And these views were echoed by a teacher who, upon finding out that she was an atheist, retorted, "You still have morals, right?" And this harassment basically caused Beverly to keep her views and identity to herself. On school campuses, scorn and stigma prevent, as I mentioned before, Black female non-believers and agnostics and skeptics from speaking out, from publicly identifying or even questioning religious idolatry and religious dogma. And this goes along with the adultification that they experience as ongoing stigmas. So these core values of African American humanism speak to the lived experiences of Black women, femmes, and queer youth struggling with anti-Black racism, with misogyny or anti-Black misogyny, with homophobia and transphobia and displacement, in their school communities, as our youth continue to bear the brunt of this nation's mental health crisis. Humanist organizations have an imperative to step up to meet the challenge or really risk becoming obsolete. For in the words of Black feminist poet Lucille Clifton, she said, "Come celebrate what I have shaped into a kind of life. I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay. My one hand holding tight, my other hand, come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed." And I'm just going to close with, this is some of our material from our programming, our Standing for Black Girls mission statement. One of the main things that we try to do is develop a regional fund specifically for Black girl survivors. We've created a Standing for Black Girls task force that enables our Black, queer, gender expansive, and female identified youth to actually engage with policymakers on a regular basis on reproductive justice and domestic violence prevention, as well as workforce development. These are some of the youth that have been recipients of our ongoing Lorraine Hansberry Humanist Scholarship, and we've got support on that from the Freedom from Religion Foundation and Black Skeptics and other community donors. But these are youth that have been mentors themselves. They came out of the WOP program and our former companion program, the Young Male Scholars Program, and they're now at colleges and universities all over the nation. One of our graduates is at Howard Law School right now. And we also do annual community rallies. This particular rally was amplifying the disproportionate numbers of African American women and girls who have been missing, have been abducted. African American women actually comprise over 30% of the individuals who have gone missing in the US, and there's very little mainstream media representation of their lives and their narratives and their communities, so we want to amplify that in our annual rally that we have in April, coming up on April 15th. And that features our youth speakers. And there's actually a clip, if I have time I'll show that, from ABC with our youth speakers. We just had this event, which is a Black Queer Generations Forum, where we brought together Black queer creatives, filmmakers, and writers with our high school students to talk about their experiences navigating homophobia, transphobia, sexism, and anti-Blackness at the King Drew Magnet campus, in addition to their triumphs and their artistic visions. And these are some of, on the left right here, are former students who have now come back, and their mentors and their peer educators, and they're all in their early 20s and late 20s, but they're at their alma mater teaching current high school students. Standing for Black Girls again. Okay, another rally. And then I have a short video, and then we could do our Q&A.
Standing! We're standing! We're standing! We're standing! I said we're standing!
Got it?
We're standing! For Black girls! For Black girls! For Black girls! For Black girls!
This is a community event to be able to help raise awareness and end rape culture and violence against Black women. As you guys know, there are countless stories, countless women unnamed that are not being heard. Their voices are not being heard in terms of justice. So we are here today to take action, to stand with our community, to continue to come out and show support.
We've effectively been told to sit down, shut up, remain silent, remain invisible, remain respectable, and to self-sacrifice for everybody under the damn sun except for ourselves.
Yeah, but if we don't stand up for ourselves, who will? We have to set the examples for these young women to understand this is what agency looks like. This is how you stand in your space and who you are and demand better for yourself, demand that we stand with you, demand to be seen, and demand to be protected. And so I'm clear about my role as a policymaker, as an elected official who is honored to be elected by those of you who live in the 2nd District.
Today we see your beauty. We see your value, your worthiness, your girlhood, your innocence, your resilience, your strength, your vibrancy, your power, your courage. In a world where you are not a priority, we prioritize you.
What we need to do to move forward when we talk about progress. When it comes to revolution, the first thing you need to know is acknowledge me, because we cannot have any sort of change if you don't acknowledge a problem. And we got a problem. We got hundreds of years of a problem.
Thank you. Again, we are here for a purpose. We are here standing for Black girls. This is our 2nd annual event, Women's Leadership. I want you guys to give a round of applause to these students who helped to put this event together. I also want to say thank you to all of our vendors and people and speakers who have been in attendance today. We've had some powerful speakers. You guys could have been anywhere else today. And let me just stress that to you. You could have been anywhere else and you chose to be here.
I feel like what we're focusing on, mental health, is a huge problem and something that needs to bring awareness. And I really want people to walk away feeling empowered.
I just feel like I want to make sure that Black women are no longer ignored and Black women are protected, right? We're super strong. We're strong Black women until, even when we don't want to be, right? And it's time to shine a light on people who have been lost in the system or lost in general or touched or tainted. Like, it's time, and I'm here for this.
This is a powerful, powerful initiative. It is past time for us to stand for the innocence and the power and the beauty of Black girls.
My favorite part was seeing all the young children. Those young children looking at me inspired. And that was really great to capture.
I had a lot of fun because there was a lot.
Okay, thank you. And are there questions? Okay, yeah, if you could do it. Okay.
Thank you so much for talking to us, and now we're going to open it up to questions. I'd like you to each make your questions concise and true questions, not just statements. And I just want to let you know that I thank you, and we all thank you for the work you're doing, because it's necessary. I've been a teacher for 40 years, and I get it. All right, thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for coming and talking with us. The term Latinx, why was it developed, and why doesn't the term Latin work?
Yeah, well, standing, not definitive statement, but my understanding is that it's more encompassing of gender diversity and gender expansiveness, and that Latin on its own has a more like Europeanized implication. And if anybody wants to jump in and provide more clarification, that'd be great. But that's
you have, excuse me, a number of teachers and educators in the audience, so thank you. I was wondering, since you're in LA, have you been able to make any inroads with BIPOC Hollywood with regard to everything you're doing and how they've responded? Hollywood.
Not personally. That really hasn't been an emphasis. I mean, certainly we did our forum a few days ago, who have done some work in the industry, but connecting with BIPOC filmmakers and producers and directors, that is uncharted territory at this point for me. But there's definitely interest. Absolutely, we have partners that are involved in the industry in certain capacities. I'm actually a stage director. I produce plays, I write plays, I direct plays, cast plays, you know. All. So I'm a little bit more conversant with that world.
You're cutting out.
Hi,
Following up on Ted's question about the term Latinx, I've heard, or I don't know how true this is, that only 3% of people who are classified as Latinx even identify with the term. Is this the sort of language that people criticize as being overly woke, overly PC, and that becomes a turnoff to the rest of us, or?
I guess I would ask who the rest of us are, what that implies.
People like me.
Non-Latinx folk or non-Latino. Yes, I mean, absolutely. There's been backlash against that term. That it, as you said, it's been derided and disdained as being overly woke or the right's appropriation of that term woke. And I can't really speak for those kinds of in-the-weeds battles. All I know is that a lot of our youth do use the term Latinx in Southern California, in South L.A., and we want to respect and amplify that, particularly given that Gen Z youth have been the forerunners, have been the activists on gender inclusivity and gender fluidity and ensuring that there is critical consciousness about the importance of that. That it's not us, older Gen Xers and baby boomers and silent generation members who have really been responsive to that revolution. And so that's why I utilize the term.
The problem of housing inaffordability that you mentioned is a problem that all the major cities are having. What's your solution to that?
To build and to actually sustain supportive housing, permanent supportive housing, to confer funding to that, to ensure that working class and low income African American, Indigenous, Latinx, and AAPI folks have access to it. And that's something that is being attempted in LA. I mean, there have been multiple bonds, multiple funding streams that have been approved for housing development in LA, specifically for populations that are vulnerable. And it's just been a major boondoggle. We have the first African American female mayor in LA's history, Karen Bass, and so she has attempted to spearhead. I think it's called a Safe Home program that would actually take hotel properties and motel properties and provide them to unhoused folks that are in encampments. And not just dumping people in housing, but also having permanent supportive housing services that are provided, wraparound services, whether or not we're talking about mental health care services, workforce development, job training, child care, domestic violence intervention. All of those need to be incorporated into permanent supportive housing plans to ensure that there is not the cycle of folks just being dumped into temporary housing, being dumped into shelters, coming from encampments or coming from other situations, and then they find themselves out in the street again because there's no sustainability.
So I actually had a question. You mentioned mental health, that's kind of my bread and butter. Someone who's in both academia and in the community, there's been a push for more diversity amongst mental health practitioners. Has that come about organically or more from DEI pushes?
What's DDI?
I'm sorry, DEI, diversity and equity, sorry.
Yes, diversity, equity, inclusion, yes. It preceded the whole DEI cottage industry ascent. I have my own issues with DEI as a regime that's granting jobs to people that are not anti-racist, that are not critically conscious about how white supremacy and anti-blackness work in public and private context. And this is something I've been working on for over a decade in workforce development in LA County. That being said, I think that that there's a confluence there. Yes, it's coming from the diversity, equity, inclusion lens. It's coming from the grassroots lens. I actually have a meeting tomorrow with a Black womanist, culturally responsive and humanistic practice to talk about trying to connect and recruit more practitioners. We just had a really difficult time trying to find Black female and Black queer aligned practitioners that are affordable, because so many folks are in private practice, and obviously they have to have rates that are going to allow them to subsist and to thrive. And many of those rates are just not affordable for our youth, coming from working class and first generation context.
Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering about that because I know I've read about the history and the demographics. Like, it started out all white man, and then pendulum swung to white women, and then now it's sort of a little more equal. Thank you.
Good morning. Really enjoyed your presentation. I just kind of have a practical question to ask about some of the scholarships, I guess, these organizations do. Let's say somebody who qualified for the scholarship said, you know what, I don't see myself going to 4-year university, but I would like to learn how to be a plumber, like to learn how to be an electrician, welder, because I know I can make a very good living doing this, but it does cost money. Can these scholarships be used for a trade school such as that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have not actually had someone from a trade school make that argument and apply. I mean, I would definitely be open to that based upon everything that you've invoked. We have 2-year college college students, 2-year community college students who are eligible as well. So definitely recognizing that not everyone is going to be accepted to a 4-year college or university off the bat. That's part of the issue with prison pipelining and the lack of availability of college prep and college readiness initiatives and support. So yeah, that's a very good question and something that we would definitely be open to.
This will be our last question.
I was just curious, what does the term expansive mean?
Expansive, in terms of gender expansive, it means encompassing the full spectrum of gender fluidity and considering one's identity. That we are trying to disrupt the binary notion of gender identity, just being male and female, but recognizing that there's a spectrum of gender identity beyond just these polarities of being masculine and feminine. So that'd be trans identity, non-binary identity. Okay, thank you very much. Great questions.
Thank you again, Sikivu. We really appreciate you coming today. I know there are books back there. I know there's books in the back. Jacob's holding them up. I also know there's a video we want to show after the coffee break, but right now, if you guys want to stand up, stretch your legs a little bit, get some coffee and snacks, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. All right? Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. All right, and there's some video she wants to play that he figured out.
Okay.
That talked to.
Okay.
Okay. And she is interested in doing that. Well, if we can just play it, can we just go to YouTube? Probably
switch?
I told her that it would require going independently. Is she okay with that? Yeah, she's okay with that. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, she's cool.
Hello, I am Belen Padilla, and as a queer Latina atheist, the scholarship has provided
spilling out and staggering in the square. There's lads and lasses falling about and a crackling in the air. Then around the dungeon doors, the shelters and the queues. Everybody's looking for somebody's arms to fall into. That's what it is. That's what it is now. Here's frost on the graves and the monuments, but the taverns are warm in town. People curse the government and shovel hard food down. Lights are out in City Hall, the castle and the keep. Moon shines down upon it all, the legless and the sleepless. Cold on the toll gate with the wagons creeping through. Cold on the toll gate, God knows what I can do. That's what it is. That's what it is now. The garrison sleeps in the citadel with the ghosts and the ancient stones. High on the parapet, a Scottish piper stands alone. And high on the wind, the Highland drums begin to roll. And something from the past just comes and stares into my soul. Cold on the toll gate with a Caledonian wind. Cold on the toll gate, God knows what I can do with you. That's what it is. That's what it is now. What it is. That's what it is now. There's a chink of light, there's a burning wick, there's a lantern in the tower. Wee Willie Winky with a candlestick, still writing songs in the wee wee house on Charlotte Street. I take a walking stick from my hotel. The ghost of Dirty Dick is still in search of Little Nell. That's what it is. It's what it is now. It's what it is. What it is now.
Is this one on? Oh, hey everybody. We have a video to show you the one from Belen that we weren't able to do earlier, and then we'll make some closing announcements. So if y'all want to look up here and listen to that. Thank you.
Belen Padilla, and as a queer Latina atheist, the scholarship has provided me the empowerment by valuing my voice, and with that empowerment and the financial support granted by the scholarship, I will continue and expand my nonprofit work that raises awareness of health disparities through science and statistics rather than faith, especially coming from a Latinx community in Las Vegas, Nevada, where 90% of my school is reported to be Hispanic and Black. And in Hispanic communities tend to be highly religious. I have always been open about my lack of faith, and I have always been shamed and belittled by my own community, family, and occasionally my own friends. But Black Skeptics has made me feel that my choice is valid and has empowered me. With this scholarship, it will ease some of the financial stress off my shoulders to further my neuroscience education at Scripps College, where I will later pursue medical school to become a neurologist to join the 6% of active Latinx identifying physicians and the 2% of Latinas with STEM degrees, and even lower percentage of low-income first-generation queer Latinas in STEM. I hope with my education, I could rally youth of color to trust in science rather than solely faith, and even pursue science/STEM careers through my mentorship that I will provide. Thank you to Black Skeptics for supporting me for who I 100% am.
Hey folks, thanks for coming. Don't forget, if you have a couple spare bucks, you can throw them in the black hat back there, or use one of our modern methods of giving to Oasis. We pay our speakers, we pay rent, we pay for a few other things, including hopefully our own building someday. If you're not able to give, don't worry about it. We're just happy to have you here. Thank you.
And just a few final announcements. Lunch is at Kandahari Afghan on Hillcroft, 5626 Hillcroft. It is 1 mile away from here. And we have Saturday, March 25th, we have bar night at Ducky McSweeney's Pub on Post Oak. We also have a trash bash Saturday morning, March 25th from 8 to 12 noon. A bunch of secular groups are getting together to help clean up Terry Hershey Park, and sounds really pretty exciting. And you can go to, it's in your program, but www.trashbash.org if you want to sign up for that to figure out where to meet and all that, okay? Next week we have Daryl Ray, an American organizational psychologist and author who focuses on topics such as workplace organizational culture, secular sexuality, and treatment of religion-induced trauma. I believe he is speaking on the idea of how difficult it is to have been raised in a fundamentalist or a very religious household, and educating your children and figuring out how you can make your family fit into that world is what it looks like it said. So, without any further ado, please have a wonderful week. And we will see you here. And thank you again, Sikivu. We really appreciate your work, and her books are in the back. Thank you. What?
Did you mention the restaurant?
I did. I said
you
Kandahari.
Okay, great.
Kandahari. I did say it.
Yeah, you did.
On Hillcroft.